Number 3. The Kampala Wedding Massacre. Nagaru Hill is the largest hill in Kampala, the capital city of Uganda. The hill is home to a commercial and residential district, and is one of the most upscale parts of the city, particularly the upper portion of the hill, which is home to several world-class hotels catering to foreigners and large homes belonging to Uganda's wealthy elite. On June 26, 1994, a large wedding party was taking place on the hill, and hundreds of people were celebrating. One guest at the party, Richard Komakech, a private in the Ugandan military's anti-smuggling unit, wasn't having a good time. Komakech had set his sights on a female guest, Irene Addy, and he asked her to dance with him. Addy wasn't interested in Komakech and turned him down. Komakech became drunk and pestered Addy several more times to dance with him. Addy continued to refuse, and Komakech became belligerent, leading several guests to forcibly eject him from the party. Komakech returned about 10 minutes later with a semi-automatic rifle. He first shot Irene Addy point blank, killing her, and then began firing at random into the crowd. At the end of his rampage, 14 guests lay dead, and a further 25 were seriously wounded, of which 12 later died in the hospital. Komakech then attempted suicide by shooting himself in the head. However, the bullet only grazed him, and he lay down and pretended to be dead. As police and emergency services arrived at the chaotic scene, they realized that Komakech was alive, and they attempted to arrest him. Some guests, seeing that Komakech was alive, attempted to attack him, and police tried to hold them back. However, there were too many guests, and not enough police, and Irene Addy's father managed to break through the police cordon and kill Komakech by crushing his skull. With 26 deaths, not including Komakech, it remains the deadliest mass shooting in Uganda's history. Komakech's rampage may have inspired Alfred Ogwang, a Ugandan police officer who shot 27 people, killing 13, at a nightclub in the city of Kamwenge on December 26, 1994, exactly 6 months after Komakech's rampage. Number 2. The University of Huntsville shooting. Amy Bishop was born on April 24, 1965. She grew up in Braintree, Massachusetts, in an upper-middle-class family. Her father, Samuel Bishop, was a professor in the art department at Northeastern University in Boston. Her second cousin is novelist John Irving, author of the critically acclaimed novels The World According to Garp and A Prayer for Owen Meany. Sometime in 1985, the family's home had been burglarized. In response, Samuel Bishop purchased a shotgun, which he kept unloaded in a closet. In December of 1986, Amy took the gun from the closet and loaded it, as her younger brother Seth had once shown her how to do. When she attempted to unload the gun, it went off, shattering a mirror in her bedroom. She went downstairs to the kitchen, where her mother and brother were, and she asked her brother to help her unload the gun. As she moved the gun around to show him, it went off and struck him in the chest. 18-year-old Seth Bishop died shortly afterwards. Amy fled the house with the gun and was arrested shortly afterwards at a nearby auto repair shop, where she had demanded a car from 2 employees. Based on the witness statements from both Amy and her mother, the shooting was ruled accidental, and the local district attorney declined to press any charges. After the death of her brother, Bishop threw herself into academic studies. She received her undergraduate degree from Northeastern University, and in 1993, she earned her PhD in genetics from Harvard University. She briefly worked at the Children's Hospital in Boston in the neurobiology lab before moving on to teach medicine at Harvard. She married a scientist, James Anderson, and had 3 daughters and 1 son with him, whom she named Seth after her deceased brother. She also aspired to become a novelist, and by the early 2000s, she had completed 3 unpublished novels. She belonged to a writers' group and believed that her writing would be a way out of the academic world with which she was becoming increasingly disillusioned. Members of the group stated that she would frequently cite her Harvard degree and her family ties to John Irving in order to boost her credential as a serious writer. In 2002, Bishop was at an International House of Pancakes restaurant in Peabody, Massachusetts, and became enraged when another customer received the restaurant's last booster seat. Bishop demanded the seat from the woman, and when she refused to give it up, Bishop launched into a profanity-laced rant and punched the woman in the head while yelling, "I am Dr. Amy Bishop." Bishop pled guilty to assault and disorderly conduct in relation to the incident and was sentenced to probation. In 2003, Bishop was hired as an assistant professor at the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. In 2007, Bishop and Anderson invented a portable cell incubator intended as an alternative to growing cell cultures in petri dishes, and they entered it in a university business plan competition, placing third and winning $25,000. While the university's president claimed that the invention would change the way biological and medical research is conducted, some scientists were quoted by the press as saying that the device was unnecessary and too expensive. During her time at the university, Bishop was not well liked by her colleagues or her students. In 2009, several students complained to administrators about Bishop, saying that she was ineffective in the classroom and had odd, unsettling ways. A petition signed by dozens of students was sent to the department head but did not result in any classroom changes. Several of her colleagues described her as strange and noted that she would often interrupt staff meetings to go off on bizarre, unrelated tangents. That same year, Bishop applied for tenure at the university, which was denied, and she was told that she would be dismissed from her position after the first semester of 2010. One professor, who was a member of Bishop's tenure review committee, had described her as crazy, and Bishop attempted to use this remark as evidence of sex discrimination against her. The professor was given an opportunity by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to retract the statement, but he refused to do so, stating, "I said she was crazy multiple times, and I stand by that. This woman has a pattern of erratic behavior. She did things that weren't normal. She was out of touch with reality." On February 12, 2010, 13 professors and staff members sat down for a meeting to discuss plans for the following semester. Despite the fact that she would have left the school by that time, Bishop attended the meeting, seating herself next to the chair of the meeting, plant biologist Gopi Padilla. Bishop, who was usually talkative during meetings, was quiet during most of the 50-minute discussion, which colleagues assumed was due to the fact that most of the topics didn't apply to her as she was leaving. As the meeting was drawing to a close, Bishop stood up and removed a 9mm handgun from her purse. She turned to face Gopi Padilla and shot him point blank in the head. She then began firing at her colleagues one by one, execution style, aiming for the head. As Bishop turned the gun on Professor Deborah Moriarty, it jammed, allowing Moriarty to escape into the hallway. Bishop followed, still attempting to shoot her, but the gun was still jammed. Moriarty was then able to get back into the meeting room, where she and several colleagues pushed Bishop from the room and barricaded the door. Inside the room, 3 staff members lay dead, and another 3 were wounded. Bishop then went to the bathroom, where she cleaned herself up and threw the gun into a trash can. She borrowed a student's cell phone and called her husband and asked him to come pick her up. As she was waiting outside the building for her ride, a sheriff's deputy arrived and arrested her. When asked about the shooting, she said, "It didn't happen. There's no way." When asked about the deaths of her colleagues, Bishop replied, "There's no way. They're still alive." In preparing for Bishop's trial, prosecutors took a closer look at the 1986 shooting death of her brother, Seth Bishop. The chief of police in Braintree, Paul Fraser, spoke with officers involved in the 1986 incident, and after reviewing the evidence, he publicly accused former police chief John Polillo of covering up a murder. Fraser stated that Amy's mother was a personal friend of Polillo's, and as a member of Braintree's town hall, also a political ally. Fraser said that when Amy's mother had come to the police station, she had asked for Polillo by name, and that Polillo had ordered Amy to be released into her mother's custody. He stated that even if the shooting of Seth was accidental, at the minimum, Bishop should have been charged for crimes she committed after fleeing the home. For example, an event that was glossed over in police reports and the media as Bishop brandishing a gun at an auto shop employee would be more accurately described as Bishop holding a loaded shotgun to the employee's chest and demanding a getaway car. It is also worth noting that the protagonist of Bishop's first unpublished novel is a woman who attempts to use a gun to frighten a friend after an argument and ends up accidentally shooting her friend's brother. Based on a review of all evidence in the case, investigators concluded that Bishop had either intended to shoot or scare her father with the gun after an argument and had instead accidentally shot her brother. In June of 2010, it was announced that Bishop would not only be charged with murder and attempted murder for shooting her colleagues, she would also be charged with murder for shooting her brother. Investigators also learned that both Bishop and her husband James Anderson had been suspects in a criminal investigation in 1993. At that time, Bishop had briefly worked at the Children's Hospital in Boston, where she had clashed with her supervisor, Dr. Paul Rosenberg. Rosenberg had given Bishop a negative performance review, stating that she could not meet the standards required for the work, and Bishop resigned from the position as a result. Shortly after that, Rosenberg was mailed a package containing 2 pipe bombs, which fortunately failed to explode. According to witness statements, Bishop was on the verge of a nervous breakdown due to her resignation. Anderson had allegedly told a witness that he wanted to shoot, stab, or strangle Rosenberg, a claim he denies. The couple had been the focus of the investigation at the time, but no charges were ever filed due to a lack of evidence. Prosecutors in 2010 also declined to file any charges against Bishop in relation to the attempted bombing, which remains officially unsolved. Early on in the investigation, prosecutors stated that they intended to seek the death penalty against Bishop for the murder of her colleagues. In 2011, Bishop entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. After receiving letters from all of Bishop's surviving victims and the family members of her murder victims, which stated that they did not wish to see Bishop put to death, a deal was reached where Bishop agreed to plead guilty in exchange for prosecutors agreeing to drop the death penalty, and in 2012, she was instead sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Massachusetts authorities ended up declining to have Bishop extradited in order to face trial for the murder of her brother, stating that they felt her Alabama sentence was sufficient punishment. As of the time of this video, Bishop remains incarcerated in an Alabama prison. Number 1. The Shujaaz Wang bombings. Shujaaz Wang is a city of about 10 million people located in northeast China. Although growth has slowed in recent years, in the latter half of the 20th century, it was one of the fastest growing cities in China, and it remains an important manufacturing center. At around 4 a.m., during the early morning hours of March 16, 2001, an apartment building in the eastern part of the city was rocked by an explosion. Emergency responders were unsure of what had caused the blast, but it soon became apparent that the explosion was no accident. Over the next hour, 3 more blasts rocked apartment buildings, 2 more in the eastern part of the city, and the final blast about a 20 to 30 minute drive away. All 4 of the buildings suffered major damage, and at least one of the buildings partially collapsed. Officially, 107 people were killed in the bombings. This was not the first time that Shujaaz Wang was targeted by a bomb attack. 1 year earlier, a man had been executed for placing much smaller bombs at department stores around the city. There was public doubt that the man executed had actually been responsible for the blasts, as many suspected that the bombings were the result of turf wars between criminal gangs or the work of laid-off textile workers. Shujaaz Wang is home to many textile factories, and in the early 2000s, a restructuring of the industry had left thousands without work. Like the bombings the previous year, many held the same suspicions about the March 16th bombings. At this time, China's government was promoting a campaign called Strike Hard, which aimed at harsher sentences for criminals and was intended to curb public fears that society was becoming increasingly violent. On March 23rd, Chinese authorities announced they had arrested Jin Ruchao, a 41-year-old unemployed mill worker, on suspicion of carrying out the bombings. Ruchao was a former resident of one of the bombed buildings and had been wanted by authorities on suspicion of murdering a woman in Yunnan province on March 9th. On March 20th, authorities had announced that Ruchao was a suspect in the bombings, and he was captured 3 days later in the southern Chinese city of Beihai. At first, police suspected that Ruchao had been assisted by accomplices or a criminal gang, but during his interrogation, he allegedly admitted to plotting and carrying out the attacks single-handedly. Ruchao also confessed to murdering his former girlfriend, Wei Zuiha, on March 9th, allegedly because she had extorted money from him. Ruchao's sister, Jean Lishang, had told police that Ruchao had a long-time fascination with explosives and had experimented with making homemade bombs as early as the 1980s. Ruchao had a previous criminal record, having been sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for rape in 1988, although it is unclear how much time he actually served. Ruchao's motivation for his bombing spree was reportedly hatred towards a neighbor, his stepmother, his ex-wife, and his sister, all of whom resided in the targeted buildings. Ruchao had a long-running property dispute with the neighbor and had feuded with his sister and stepmother over an inheritance. Although Ruchao claimed to have acted alone in planning and carrying out his massacre, 3 other men were arrested for supplying Ruchao with the materials he needed to carry out his attacks. Hu Xiaohong, a minor, was arrested for selling Ruchao detonators and paper fuses, and 2 other men, Wang Yushun and Hao Fequan, who ran an illegal fireworks factory outside of the city, were arrested for selling Ruchao explosives. Ruchao's trial began on April 17th. He testified that he had hired motor tricycles to transport over 1,200 pounds of dynamite, hidden in sacks marked chicken feed, to the targeted buildings, where he hid them. On the night of his attack, he used several different taxis to travel from building to building, setting off the bombs as he went. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Wang Yushun and Hao Fequan were also convicted and sentenced to death. Hu Xiaohong, who had sold Ruchao the fuses and detonators, was also sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted for 2 years, meaning his sentence could be converted to life in prison for good behavior. Within China and the international community, many expressed doubt about Ruchao's conviction. While it is possible that Ruchao could have traveled to all 4 locations within the time specified, many suspect that it is more likely that multiple people were setting off the bombs. Others doubt that Ruchao, who was partially deaf and had difficulty communicating and was an uneducated mill worker, could have masterminded such a plot and manufactured the explosives. Prior to Ruchao's arrest, online Chinese chat rooms were rife with suspicions about criminal gangs, corrupt officials, and angry, unemployed textile workers. After Ruchao's arrest, these comments ceased. As the Chinese government monitors all online chat rooms for discussions deemed dangerous to society or the ruling communist government, many suspect that these chat rooms were being censored. Because of all this, many believe that Ruchao did not act alone in carrying out the attacks, and some believe that he was not even involved at all. Hospital workers and local residents also cast doubt on the official death toll of 107, with many stating the true number killed was much higher. If Ruchao's confession was true, then his attacks are one of the largest mass murders ever carried out by a single person. If he did not act alone, or was a scapegoat, then it is unlikely that anyone else who may have been involved in the attacks will ever face justice, as Chinese authorities consider the case closed. Jin Ruchao was executed by gunshot on June 17, 2001. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, check out my other videos and subscribe for more content just like it. Thanks for watching.